and I will hand over to our last presenter today, Adam. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me and see me? Can everyone hear me and see me? Great. Okay, so thanks for the opportunity to speak here. My name is Adam Piggott, but I'm joined today by Arwen, Natalie, and James. So we're here to talk about a Zoom reading club to satisfy high-achieving first-year students. And hopefully this dovetails well with Raylene's talk, where she mentioned pedagogy first, and then you try to figure out how to use the tools to do what you want to do. But it starts with pedagogy and your goals for what you're trying to accomplish. So here's a quote on this first slide, which sort of lays out part of the context for what we're talking about today. This quote comes from some work by I've forgotten the last name, Kift, about sort of how should we be teaching first-year students in Australian universities. And I think the key here is that we want to create learning communities, and these should be embedded, these should be promoted through embedding in the first-year curriculum some active and interactive learning opportunities, particularly for peer-to-peer collaboration and teacher-student interaction. So that's why I'm here with 3 of my students to talk about some teacher-student interaction that we had. So here's some more of the context. Some promises are made to our high-achieving entry students. We have a Bachelor of Advanced Science honours degree, which aims to challenge students and develop their deep interest in science. And we promise them that in the first year, they'll learn interdisciplinary approaches to problem solving and build networks with other high-achieving students and research scientists. So that's a clear promise that is made. And then the responsibility to deliver that in the first year falls in a course called Science 1100. And it's taken in the first semester. It's interdisciplinary, quantitative reasoning and science, and it's supposed to deliver on this promise. So before the pandemic struck, I came up with an idea to try something and then had to adapt it, the mode of delivery. But the idea was model a community of learning through an optional reading club that enables the most engaged students to dive more deeply into the course content together. So trying to create a community and allow students to meet each other, but do so in a way that is building a semi-professional learning community. All right, so key to the method or the way to implement it was we'll meet once per week over Zoom. Of course, it was going to be in person to start with, but over Zoom eventually. I was going to advertise it, but not push too hard. I didn't want students to come along under sufferance. Come along if you're excited by the opportunity. My job was to identify a deeper idea present in the week's material, then to pick an accessible paper from the source material for the course that brings out the idea. And then participants, and I was included in the participants now. I've got to read that paper before the meeting. And then we're going to talk our way through the paper in the meeting, but no more formal in the structure than that, because I thought the more structure, the more chance that someone would be disaffected, or the less chance for the community building process. And then another key is to meet as equals and try to let everyone lead the discussion at some point. So in that spirit, I'm going to try and let some other people lead the discussion, and we're going to hear from some participants. This is Arwen.
Hi, so I came along to Reading Club because I wasn't finding the course itself as challenging as I could, so I kind of wanted to extend a bit more and understand a bit more of the content, kind of dive into it, you know, like you would as a scientist a little bit, like actually reading the papers, actually seeing the data, that sort of stuff. And then once I came along, it was fun, which is great. Like we just got to read through these papers on a whole variety of different topics, and discuss or critique them with other people talking about it. And yeah, that was really interesting. The being able to actually interact with people all together was good because we were all at home during the pandemic. You don't have as much peer contact with anyone. So it was good to be able to interact with people at all and like-minded people who could have a good discussion. And being on Zoom also kind of made it accessible, and it was an hour a week, so it wasn't a massive time commitment, which was also good. I did kind of, having done it for most of the semester, a few things that stood out to me that we could do better. One of those would be reading a slightly wider variety of papers, as our course had a lot of applications in biology and ecology, whereas I would have liked to read some physics paper, but they obviously aren't quite as accessible to people. Other times we weren't always able to answer questions, so we'd have a paper and be a really, really interesting paper, and then we'd head up on something and go, why did they do that? What's this talking about? And we wouldn't always necessarily know. And it was hard to work out because we didn't necessarily have someone who'd written the paper or something as an expert.
Yeah. So, if we can pick up on that last point. So we lacked the experts.
Yes.
But what do you think would have happened if we had an expert with us?
They probably wouldn't have liked us critiquing their papers.
Yeah. So if we had the author of the paper, that would be a different sort of experience.
Yes, it would.
But do you think you would have been more passive if there was an expert?
I'm not sure I'm that sort of person.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the person.
Like, yes, I can understand, but perhaps, having an opportunity afterwards or being able to make a list of questions that could be emailed to someone, that might have been helpful just as a way to answer those questions that we still had unresolved.
Great. Well, thanks, Arwen. And now we're going to hear from another participant. This is Natalie.
Hi. Yeah. Okay, so I joined Reading Club because I was interested in just reading papers. I like science and I study maths, so maths is throughout everything, and especially statistics. So I would focus on all the statistical method in the paper, which annoys a lot of other people, but that's okay. So I just like the fact that it wasn't assessed. That was a key thing. It was optional. Everyone was there because they wanted to be. And like Arwen said, the pandemic was so isolating. You're completely alone from all your friends. You can't get in contact with people. And you've just got assessment piling up, and it's the one place where you just didn't have that worry. And that was really special.
Right. So, Natalie, what did you think of the free-form setting?
Because it wasn't structured, it allowed for just free-flowing thought. So whatever came to someone's head, they would just say it. And it just bounced off of each other in this cascading wave that made for a greater product than the individual sum.
All right. And did you learn some science while we were going along there?
Oh yeah, I mean, about penguins and about how far they can travel. That was amazing.
Great. All right. And then our next contributor is James.
Hello. So yeah, I think the Reading Club really has two powerful aspects in it, which is pretty well described by its own name. You have first of all, the reading side. You think of reading, you think of absorbing information, you think of exposure, of learning things. And I think that the reading club really did that well, beyond just the specific science of that paper, but in a more general sense, it was exposure to what science looks like in the field, what it means to research in science. And I think that's particularly useful in an undergrad context, with many of us looking to pursue research careers. They're not very clear and well-defined jobs, and so it's nice to look into that world and see what it's like to work as a researcher. And then, of course, it's plain good fun, learning interesting science, as has been pointed out. It's really quite thrilling to be looking at that front line of human knowledge. I think that's why we all do science. And then, of course, you have the second aspect. You have the club part, which is all about the active engagement. And I think that really elevates it. Anyone can read a paper on a Sunday afternoon by themselves, but having people around you to read it with and to discuss with really elevates that. As a group, you can decipher much more complex topics in the papers. There are a number of papers where the topic was sort of beyond the expertise of any of us, but we could each contribute different bits of knowledge and come out with something that was a lot more in-depth than any one of us could have done individually. And then, of course, when, in critiquing the papers and looking at the science that went into the work, you have that sort of mental spar, that challenge with peers over, what was done well, what could have been done differently, how do you interpret this, how do you interpret that? And I think that's really all part of it, all part of that active discussion. And then, of course, that leads to, as was mentioned before, there were some times where we just didn't know what was going on, where an expert might be able to answer those questions, but that's all part of the fun, is coming together and figuring out what is going on, and that sort of creative side and asking the questions rather than having to look for an answer. And then, of course, all this discussion works best in free form, as we've already made the point. So I think that's really special, is being able to not just be exposed to this information and science, but to have that active engagement and to really elevate it that way.
All right. So you think, James, did we get the right crowd to Reading Club? Because it wasn't supposed to be exclusive, but it was supposed to be for the people who wanted to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think it's one of those things where you can't really make people interested, in whatever the topic is. But I think it's particularly important here is that it's best when people are asking questions and are happy to be creative and are happy to leave it without actually knowing the answer. I think it's not too common, but I think we achieved that quite well. Leaving it open and free form really is all part of it.
Great. Well, thanks, James. Thanks, everyone. So perhaps I'll just wrap up by just going back to this quote. It's Sally Kipp, of course, who wrote this. And so we just heard from some participants, and I'm a participant too. And again, I just want to reiterate what I was aiming to produce is begin construction of a learning community. Right? So we want to promote this idea of students helping each other, learning things, but enjoying the process, and create a community, because retention and at university is greatly helped when people feel like they belong and that they're getting something out of it, in addition to knowledge that's being transferred in some sort of direct way. Frankly, Reading Club is a hoot. I look forward to it. I enjoyed the papers. I enjoyed sort of different perspectives on the source material from which the course is constructed. So that was really quite interesting for me as well. So perhaps we'll leave the presentation part there, but we'll be delighted to take any questions you may have about the practical ways to get this done, or what we think we liked about it or would like to change.
Adam, thank you so much, and it was such a insightful experience to hear from the students. So Arwen and James, so good to hear that science is alive and well and people think it's fun. And I love, Natalie, that you're putting the maths back in there. We need more maths. Look, it was delightful, and it's really fascinating, I think, to see what people are trying to do with this crazy year, and hopefully it continues, because I can see, you know, that whole ability to discuss science papers, and let's throw in some maths. I love maths. Just to be able to discuss that, that's amazing for our students. So thank you so much, Adam, for sharing that. I'm very conscious of the time, but we do have some time for some questions. If anyone wants to ask anything of our 4 presenters, I might just get the 4 presenters to put your microphones back on. So if anyone's got a question, if you want to raise your hand or just jump in, we've probably got, so I don't get in trouble, we've probably got 10 minutes for question time. And I know there was a talk about Twitter. If someone wants to jump in and you know, have a chat about what they're doing with Twitter, I think we'd all be intrigued about how you're using that as well. No one's up for sharing. Any comments from our presenters? Because I know that was amazing to hear what everyone's doing and how they're doing.
I have a question. Can I please ask Adam a question? Adam, first of all, so wonderful of you to create this high-achieving student reading club. So my question is, have you any thoughts about how your non-high-achieving students feel about this? I'm trying to put myself in the position of one of your students who's not doing so well, struggling, especially this year. Any thoughts about how they feel and how you accommodate them? I'd be interested in your opinion.
Michael, of course, I'm thinking about students at all who are sort of experiencing all levels of success all the time, and probably like you, spending most of my time thinking about the students who aren't finding it easy. I think one of the keys is that while I designed the reading club with the high achieving students in mind, because it was within the context of this course that was specifically for high achieving students, it wasn't advertised as, are you a high achieving student? If so, you know, are you finding this all too easy? It was advertised as, we've got a reading club, we're going to read the papers, this might help you find it more interesting, come along. So it attracted students who want to be engaged in that way. Now, I guess you could advertise a little differently if you wanted to make sure you're attracting students who are struggling as well, and by emphasizing the supportive nature of it. So I guess if I wanted to implement this in, say, a version of our course which is for all science students rather than the advanced science students, I think it could still work. I just package the promotional material differently. Yeah, because at the end, it's not about understanding the paper, it's about talking with each other about the material.
So a quick follow-up question, if I may. What percentage of your student cohort would participate in this book reading club, do you think?
All right, so maybe Arwen, do you want to take this one?
So I think on a regular day we'd normally have 5 or 10 students turn up, which at a guess I'd say there are about 100 in our cohort.
About 100 in the cohort.
Because it was completely optional, non-assessed, that means, you know, people who are busy are not going to turn up. And so kind of the 3 of us were very regular, and we had other students who would come kind of semi-regularly. Other people would just drop in every once in a while. Because it was really flexible, you didn't have to make any commitments. So yeah, so maybe call that 5 or 10% of people who choose this extension.
Has anyone else got a question? We've still got a couple of minutes before.
I got a question for Raylene. it was a great presentation. All presentations were great for today. Just a question about the professional development rating. Like in our university, for example, we are trying to create a culture where casual staff are taking graduate certificate in other education. We even have that in the offer letters where we ask them at least to take one unit, even for permanent staff. Like you have said that there is a professional development needed for those educators to be well equipped with the tools so they can perform better. How about formal education in teaching and learning? Does that come through when you collect the data and analyze it?
Yeah, look, there's currently no requirement for people to have, you know, a grad cert in tertiary teaching or anything like that. But there's a lot of professional learning available. When new staff come to the university, they are required to do what used to be called the Foundations of Teaching and Learning program. I think the name has changed to Professional Learning Essentials around learning and teaching. So there is a requirement for the mandated professional learning hours that are learning and teaching focus. And that's where they get the basics, if they haven't had it before, or even if they have actually, around learning theory, around assessment design, collaborative learning, active learning, all of those important things. So they get that, but there is no requirement for staff to actually have a formal certificate. We do have the HEA fellowship program as well, which is really popular. We've had lots of staff take that up. And we also have a PREP program, which is the peer review of educational practice. So staff who are then doing the teaching get another teacher to come in, and it's all, you know, there's assessment and that sort of stuff. Basically, they get that peer feedback, and then they say, well, yeah, you're going really well, or, you know, these are the things you can work on, and it's that's how you learn. And so that's the approach that we're taking.
So what's your personal point of view about that? Do you think that compulsory education and learning and teaching would be the way forward?
Oh, I don't know. I am a teacher. I am a trained teacher. So I'm sort of skewed to that way of thinking. I mean, you can't go wrong by studying to be a teacher, can you? So, but, you know, I think that if you have an openness to learn and you make the effort to learn, I'm not entirely convinced that a certificate is the solution to the problem. I think it's a learning mindset that might stand you in better stead personally.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much.
All right, guys, I am very conscious of time because I know you probably all need to have a stretch before we go to the closing of the conference. Is there any last minute question that anyone would like to ask? And just a reminder, if you have a chance to do the quick survey that's in the chat, that would be great as well. No other burning questions? Well, to all our presenters, thank you so much. That was so informative. It's always such a great insight to see what everyone else is doing and realise that we are all in this together, that we are all feeling the same, that we're all, you know, trying to overcome these challenges. And I think the 4 presentations gave us such a great way to do that and what you're doing. So I thank you so very much for doing that. Thank you everyone for joining us in this session. And just to remind you that 2:30, because I will be in trouble if we're late, the conference closing happens. So hope to see you all there. And thank you very much.
The closing is on this this particular one.